Can I go live like this? Or this is better, cool. Hey, hi, and hello, everybody. Welcome back to the International Asexuality Day live stream. My name is Ashabi. My pronouns are she and they, and I am the creator of Ace and Grace. With this specific stream, I'm going to be talking about asexuality and the intersections of the Black identity. So we're going to have a quick little run through of what asexuality is, the ins and outs, and towards the end, I'm going to talk about the intersections of the Black identity, specifically from my perspective as a Black femme. And then we're going to talk about ways that people can actually be helpful within the community and actually support those who are asexual. For people who are joining the live stream, if you have any questions or commentary, just be sure to add it into the chat. And towards the end of the slides and presentation, I'm going to go through them and answer them. So let's get the ball rolling. So, asexuality and the intersections of the Black identity. So here's table of contents, what we'll be going over today. What is asexuality? Asexuality in romance, asexuality in intimacy, asexuality in myths, asexuality in Blackness, next steps, continuing education, and resources. So for those who are joining, for those who don't know, this is going to be a quick asexuality 101. Within the LGBTQIA acronym, there's letter A in there. And for most people who don't know, the A stands for asexual. It doesn't stand for ally, it stands for ace, it stands for aromantic, it stands for agender. For people who don't know asexuality and people who identify as asexual, that means that you are a person who doesn't feel sexual attraction towards other people. It doesn't mean that you're celibate, but you can be asexual and you can be celibate. It is because of celibacy. Celibacy is a choice, and you can choose to be asexual and celibate. You can also be asexual and sex positive. You can be asexual and sex neutral. You can be asexual and choose to engage in sexual activity. It doesn't take away from your asexual identity. Asexual people make up about 1 to 2 of the world's population, 1 to 2% of the world's population. And that's about 75 to 100 million people. So despite the fact that that number is very small, there are a lot of us in the world and a lot of us who deserve representation. Asexuality is also a part of the queer community, despite what others may say. So within asexuality, there is a spectrum. Most people are aware of the spectrum being demisexual, gray sexual, and aspec. Person who is sexual and aligns with that is person who's heterosexual. But then that spectrum, there's gray sexuality, which is somebody who identifies as asexual, but has sexual attraction to people once in a very blue moon. With me, that used to be Hugh Jackman, it used to be Bad Bunny, but I also lean across the asexual spectrum. So that's no longer how I identify. Within demisexual people are people who develop a sexual attraction after a strong emotional bond has been formed. That emotional bond can happen in an hour, it can happen in a day, it can happen in a month, in a year. It can also fade away over time. That's something that changes with everybody who is along the spectrum. And with aspec people, just like myself, you can be all along the lines of asexuality. So asexuality is very different for many different people. And here are a few things that I wanted to go over. So for most people, asexuality is a foreign term for them. And because of that, they have very negative stereotypes and connotations that come with that. If you're asexual, people assume that you're a prude, that you produce with yourself, that you don't do things that may align with heteronormative roles in society. And because of that, we hear things that asexuality isn't. So sexuality isn't an absence because of a bad relationship. Asexuality isn't an absence because of religious reasons. Like I mentioned before, asexuality isn't celibacy. It isn't sexual oppression, aversion, or dysfunction. It isn't loss of libido due to age or circumstance. It's also not a fear of intimacy. It also isn't an inability to find a partner. These are all things that occur whether you're asexual or not. And to tie them to the term asexuality is not only a disservice to the asexual community, but also doesn't allow people who are asexuality actually feel comfortable within their identities. For people who are asexual, they might want friendship and understanding and empathy. Aces might fall in love. They may experience arousal and an orgasm if you are sex positive or sex neutral. They choose to masturbate. Aces also may choose to engage in sexual activity or choose not to engage in sexual activity. Asexual people can also be of any gender, age, and background, and asexual people can also have spouses and or children. Asexual people come in a wide range of colors and experiences, and all of them should be validated within our community. So, asexuality and romance. There are asexuals who still be involved in romantic and sexual relationships. Those people who are asexual and choose not to involve themselves in romantic relationships are aromantic people. There are different types of romanticism, just like there are different types of ways to express your sexuality. The types of romanticism are homoromantic, biromantic, panromantic, and heteromantic. And because aromantics do not fully, because you're aromantic doesn't mean that you don't like romance. It just means that you don't want to pursue a romantic relationship. And within the term of aromantic, there's different types of ways you can express that. So a cute little term is called a crush or a squish, which is the equivalent in the aromantic community, which is when you have a squish, it's on someone and it's in a platonic way where you want to be friends or get to know them really well. Right over here, there's a graphic that was made by the students in the University of Philippines, and they outlined what aromanticism is. So aromanticism is an orientation where people do not feel any romantic attraction towards another person. Like I mentioned before, it's a spectrum. There's different types of ways you can express your romantic affiliation towards people you're attracted to. And it's also different from asexuality. A lot of times, asexuality and aromanticism is lumped together. I think it's because of the A's, but you can be asexual and not aromantic. You can be aromantic and not be asexual, or you can be both. So, asexuals and romance. Here's a cute little diagram here that outlines romantic and aromantic and what's in the middle. So for romantic people, there are people who desire a loving relationship. Whatever love means to you, that's how you fall into that line. May develop crushes on people. And some examples of romantic relationships would be Beyonce and Jay-Z, your mom and dad on New Year's Eve, and so on and so forth. Within aromantic relationships, they are satisfied with friendships. They may have squishes on people. And some examples of that are Isaac Newton, Elsa from Frozen, and some people who are really active on Tumblr as well. In the middle of these two, there's a lot of overlap. Like I mentioned earlier, desiring a loving relationship doesn't have to be a romantic thing. That can also show up in your friendships as well. For the middle, you may or may not like sex. You can also be heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual. And for some people, if you're in the middle, they may or may not call you back, depending on if you make them feel good about how they identify. So now we're on the asexuality and intimacy portion. Because we live in a society that forces down our throats sexuality and sex being the only way to express love onto a person, a lot of people who are within this identity feel invalidated. Western society tends to focus on the performance of heteronormative hypersexual interactions to validate one's love within a partnership. And asexual people oftentimes see a strain in maintaining their relationships through sex or meeting their partner's sexual needs and doing this type of performative work because they're convinced that their partners want this and give them that opportunity to enjoy sex, even though the asexual person may not be interested in it. Here's a quote from Sure with a experiment they did with other people who are asexual. I am romantically attracted to the opposite sex, but I don't desire sexual contact. I enjoy cuddling, kissing, and even pleasing my partner, but I don't desire sexual intercourse. That can be a normal thing for a lot of people who are asexual, and that shouldn't be dismissed or seen as devalued because of the society we live in. You can love your partner in so many other ways and be intimate with your partner in so many other ways, and that can be just as satisfying than sex. Intimacy outside of sexual intercourse can be just as fulfilling, if not more, within a romantic relationship. And intimacy can look like hand holding, sharing space, learning each other's hobbies, and supporting one another's lives. In the graphic next to it, I made this in 2020 on Instant Grace, and here it says intimacy does not equal sex, and intimacy does not equal arousal. The expression intimacy can look like so many different things, like talking about something you're both really excited about, watching a really good show or movie, running your fingers through your partner's hair, napping together, laughing, holding hands, giving each other cute gifts together, listening, taking a bath and shower together. There are so many different ways to be intimate with your partner, with your person, with people that you love and want to hold space with. And all those ways should be validated and honestly mean a lot more in strengthening the relationship that you're with and allow you and the partner you're with to actually explore different ways that you are. So back on the asexuality commentary and myths. I have 4 myths here down for you, and we're gonna go through each one. So myth 1, asexuality is a choice. The truth, sexual orientation of any alignment is not a choice. You are asexual, you are gay, you are lesbian, you are trans, you are pan. In our human experience, obviously you can go through different versions of yourself where you think you may be something, you think you may be not. But for most of us and for majority of us, we know that we are asexual. Nothing is going to change that. And making attempts to change the person that you're with only shows them that they should not feel comfortable or safe with you, which can cause more harm down the line. Myth 2, aces have something wrong with them. Asexual people often hear that because we do not have sexual attraction with other people, we may be suffering from a disorder, an arousal disorder, or hypoactive sexual desire disorder. And the truth of the matter is, asexuality is not a disorder. Asexuality is something that has existed throughout the lengths of time. And unfortunately, because of how society tends to demonize queer communities and queer history, we're unable to actually learn more about the depths of asexuality and how it shows up in our lifetime. Moving on that, the DSM is something that a lot of clinicians and a lot of medical professionals use to try and diagnose people who fall into the asexuality spectrum. And fortunately, we've moved past diagnosing and pathologizing asexuality and have started to understand what asexuality is. But unfortunately, we are still working towards validating a lot of people who are aligned with this identity. Myth number 3, aces are against sex. Like I mentioned earlier, being asexual does not mean that you are not a sexual person. It means that you don't have sexual attraction towards other people. They are asexual people who are sex positive, sex favorable, sex repulsed, sex neutral. Just like so many other people within the human experience, we all experience asexuality differently. And just because you actively have sex or enjoy sex, it doesn't mean or take away from your identity as an asexual person. So myth number 4 is you can't date if you're asexual. And the truth is there are many, many people who are asexual who are in meaningful relationships. There are asexual people who date great people who love to understand more about how they identify. There are asexual people who are in marriages, who have kids, and just live a very great and fulfilling life. And assuming that asexual people don't date only limits your dating pool and doesn't even give you the opportunity to grow in a way that not only validates your partner, but also allows you to explore different ways to validate yourself within the society that we live in. There's a graphic next to it by Julia Naves that talks about dating and asexuality and the assumptions that come with it. So above you see all these people who are her friends making assumptions about asexuality. The comments are, you can't be in a relationship. Do you even care? How can you ever love him? You're not attracted to him. He's still sexual. You're not. How's this going to work? And these are all the things that people hear, especially if you're asexual and entering a relationship with a person who's allosexual. For those who are not aware, allosexual is the person who is a non-asexual person. So you can be heterosexual, homosexual, pansexual, bisexual, just not asexual. In the commentary below, you see Julia say that she will never find this person attractive and she'll always have trouble having sex. So she might get bored when they kiss. And people will essentially doubt that they're sexual because of the fact that she's asexual. Towards the end of the comic, the person that she's talking to, they end up dating and end up in a very long and loving relationship. And that's what a lot of us deserve. We deserve to have somebody who sees us for who we are, supports us, and allows us to thrive in romantic relationships as well. So the nitty gritty of the presentation, asexuality and the Black identity. The quote that I'm pulling is from Malcolm X, and the quote is, "The most disrespected woman in America is the Black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the Black woman. And the most neglected person in America is the Black woman." Just for context, I am a Black woman, I'm Black androgynous, I'm Black femme. So a lot of the conversations that I'll be having around this topic will be from this experience, and I'll be going in depth about that as well too. In the book, Let's Talk About Love, it is a narrative that centers a Black biromantic asexual young woman who describes a Black sexual politic, and it navigates and undermines a more rigid logic of society and sexuality. In the book, she talks about how her partner, who is a non-asexual person, invalidates her and tells her that she doesn't understand how she can be asexual and go through all these things. And the main character of the book is going through a lot of difficulties trying to navigate this relationship and also validate herself. And it's something that a lot of people who are asexual can understand. But as a Black woman in this identity, it's also very difficult because a lot of times we aren't often given the opportunity to express ourselves in a way that honors our truth, because society has deemed us to be two things especially. So in society, Black women are often objectified before we are even aware of ourselves. There's often hypersexualization of Black women in our society, labeled as a hoe, a stripper, baby mama, or a sex worker. And similarly, the asexual mammy is also used to politically decenter Black women's agency and prioritize white women's desires. This is something that Black women often see, and it can be linked in the US to slavery, especially because Black women are often only seen as caregivers or birthers or sexual beings. And this is something that is stereotyped not only in the US for Black women, but stereotyped for Black women across the world. And it's very unfortunate because as Black women, we carry a lot of weight on our shoulders to identify as one way. And when we try to escape that stigma, when we try to escape that stereotype, we're often seen as less than or often invalidated because society chooses to label us and keep us in this box and not allow us to grow out of it. With that being said, the mammy trope is also aligned with asexuality, and despite the fact that all of those things are aligned with asexuality, the mammy trope is often used as a negative trope for Black women as well. So going on, Sharonda J. Brown has released an amazing book called Refusing Compulsory Sexuality. And in that book, they describe the experience of asexuality from a Black lens and several other ways that we can start to deconstruct how asexuality looks in this way. So asexuality is already greatly invisibilized as a queer identity, and Black asexuality is even more so. This leaves many Black asexuals with a unique barrier to finding our place on the asexuality spectrum and developing community with others like us. Within the ACE community, I'm sure you've heard Yasmin speak about this many times. Um, we are often not given a place in this community, and it's very difficult to even speak up about our experiences because A, it's already not seen as an identity that's valid, and B, Black women who speak up about the injustices that come upon us are often vilified and seen as a troublemaker, seen as less than, seen as a very negative trope that further demonizes our voice and further pushes us away from community. Exploring the ways queer folk love is key to understanding how there can be a reclamation of power in the erotic, the queer, and places of love and pleasure that fuel and challenge systems of Black queer erasure. Like I mentioned earlier, within the queer community itself, there's a lot of anti-Blackness, there's a lot of racism that occurs, which can be difficult to navigate because, again, our community is very small. But even with that, there have been so many people behind us who have paved the way for not only Black queers to be seen, but also queer communities in general to have spaces where we can actually support and celebrate our identities. So being able to be part of the sexual identity and being a Black woman is very important because we are constantly being told that our voices don't matter, and we're constantly being told that we should just sit back and let other people do the work. And within this community, it's going to be very important for other people outside of myself to actually see these things and advocate for our voices to be heard so that not only Black femmes can feel validated in our sexuality, but Black people, brown individuals, Indigenous individuals, and other people of color can actually feel validated in their experiences as well. So the next quote below says, a conscious Black asexual requires a knowledge of sexual politics imposed on Black people as part of historical genealogy. Furthermore, as a Black feminist thought, this is intertwined with action, reflection, reflexibility as a key part of development of a critical consciousness. Like I mentioned before, this work doesn't just stop here. It is a constant thing. Being anti-Black is a constant thing. And it doesn't stop because we're queer. It doesn't stop because we're neurodivergent. It doesn't stop because we're asexual. It's something that has to happen consistently. Because we live in a society that often vilifies and demonizes our voices, we have to make sure that the most marginalized people in the community have the opportunity to share their experiences so that other people who look like us can actually feel supported and feel empowered to be visible and just live in our own truths. With that being said, there have been so many spaces within the online communities that have allowed conversations like these to occur. There are spaces on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and Instagram that provide more representation and more community and comfortability within the intersections of these identities. So as more queer identities are being highlighted in society, we often see the most front-facing representation being white, male, and cis able-bodied people. As much as I love referencing BoJack Horseman and Todd Javas, he is still a white, cis, able-bodied male in this world that we live in today. And that representation meant so much to me, and it's going to mean so much for more people who come out as ace. And with the new series coming out, Heartstoppers, we're still seeing that sort of representation being shared throughout. And again, we're going to see more people share the fact that they're asexual, more will be comfortable with their expression and that identity, but there's still going to be a lack of representation there as well. Black voices are often the most marginalized within these conversations, despite being at a higher risk of harm. And this is because of colonialism, white supremacy, and the idea of being asexual and Black being deemed as an impossibility. And that impossibility is just linked back to the mammy and hypersexualization of Black women and the ability to reclaim our identities within this community. Even with that, asexuality and queerness in general has existed for decades, eons, lifetimes before colonization. And it's also existed for a long time in Africa too. Just speaking as a person who's Nigerian, there's a lot of history tied to queerness. And because of the work that I do around this, I like to see how things have changed, things have been honored, and how we need to start to shift our mindset and work towards understanding what we did pre-colonialism so that we can actually start to validate and support asexuality throughout society. Valuing these experiences and stories is not only an act of decolonization, but it should also be a goal with clinicians who are seeing people who are asexual, teachers, students, and individuals. We should all strive towards working and building support and safety communities within these spaces as well. So, next steps. What can we do to be more inclusive in our work and intentional in the interactions that we have with others? So what does continuing education look like? Like I mentioned earlier, asexuality is almost absent between all and a majority of queer, feminist, and critical sexual studies. What can we do as lay people, as individuals within communities that work towards advocacy, that are in medical fields, that are in teaching professions, and push this type of education and support forward? We can start curating spaces like these. We can start contributing to qualitative and quantitative studies relating to asexuality. There's a lot of research coming out now, aside from what majority of people are doing in schools. Yasmin and the Stonewall organization is also working towards creating more studies and research opportunities so that asexual people can actually feel supported and heard in these spaces. And this is going to also allow for more legislation, more protections for asexual people in the queer community. Even with that, what can we do with clients and students who are presenting concerns around the asexual identity? We can also start by not pathologizing conversations and work towards affirming people who are asexual. Outside of me being a part of Ace and Grace and doing that, I'm also a therapist. So this is something that's really important for me. Understanding that pathologizing people who are coming with queer identities is the most harmful thing you can do, aside from invalidating them, and working towards affirming not only my clients, but also people around me is going to be a big step in understanding who they are as people, and also furthering my own and other people's education around asexuality too. Even with that, we have to do a lot more work around decentering whiteness within queer spaces. Like I mentioned earlier, asexuality is a very small minority within the queer community, but it is still big enough for people to understand what this is. And even with the representation we have right now, it's still very white, it's still very male-centered, and it's not representative of people who look like me, or people who have experiences that align parallel to mine. So we have to work towards prioritizing intersectionality, asexual knowledge, what intimacy looks like outside of a heteronormative and hypersexual society, and understanding secondary agency and discrimination, and also healing. This is going to be work that's going to be constant, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be rough for a lot of people, understanding the harm that they may have caused unintentionally, so that they can further challenge themselves, so they can actually be more intentional with the conversations and interactions they have with people who are ace. And we also work towards the unfortunate fact that there is a lack of knowledge around the subject of asexuality. We have to work towards incorporating more books that share stories and experiences around asexuality. Like I mentioned earlier, the book that Sharonda just released called Refusing Compulsory Sexuality is a really great educational tool, not only for people who are just trying to learn more about asexuality, but for people who are in educational spaces, for people who are in medical spaces, for people who are just trying to do more for the communities that they serve. Because the biggest part of this is educating yourself. And if you go into spaces without that type of education, you will be more likely to cause harm than do good. So these are some things that we can all do to continue our education and continue supporting communities within the asexual space. So this is the resource page that I have. These are all the people I pulled from. This is everyone that you can look back onto and see more of. And yeah, I think that regardless of us being part of this space, regardless of us being part of asexuality in the community and celebrating this lovely day of International Asexuality Day, there's still going to be a lot of work for us to do to make sure that everyone who is part of this community can be heard and supported and represented in different ways as well. And that's all I have for you all today. So thank you so much for being a part of this. And I appreciate everything that Nick has done and this space has done to allow me to present on this topic. Yeah, so after this panel, after this presentation, we were going to also have the Spanish ACEs live stream is going to be occurring too. So you can also hop into that after this is done and learn more about Spanish ACEs, because again, we need representation in every aspect of the asexual community. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so now that I'm done, I'm gonna be opening the floor up to any questions that you may have, any commentary that you have as well on the presentation that I just shared, and anything that you wanna talk about. I'm gonna have the floor open for about 15 more minutes, and any questions that may come to mind, just drop them in the chat. Do I have any time for questions? Yes, I do. Ask, ask all the questions you want. Also, thank you for the well wishes and thank you for the love. I'm just going through the chat right now. And yeah, Let's Talk About Love is a really great book. And I hope more people read about it. Tell you more, let me add this here. Can you tell us about Ace and Grace? Yeah, of course. So Ace and Grace started in 2019. For some context, I'm from Chicago. I'm also Nigerian. And in Chicago, we have a annual Pride Fest that occurs around June. I spent some time walking in the Pride Fest. So it was really fun for me to experience and like share and see other people who were Ace. During this specific year, I was like dressed in a nines, looked really cute. And I had my ACE flag hanging up, and I was walking around just chatting with other people who were in the crowd and letting them know that, you know, I'm here, I see you being ACE. And towards the end of the crowd, I saw a line of like really sweet Black kids who were just screaming at me about me being ACE. And one of them said, hey, you're ACE, you're Ace and Grace. And I'm just like, oh, wow, that's such a great thing to say. So that's kind of how the term Ace and Grace came from. And Ace and Grace started because I wanted to be able to create a community that reflected my own journey and reflected asexuality in a way that also honored other people's journeys that look like mine. So Ace and Grace is what I use to educate people on asexuality, the ins and outs of what the spectrum of that looks like, as well as highlight other people who are asexual within the community that aligns to mine. So I highlight a lot of Black ACEs, a lot of Indigenous and Brown ACEs as well, and just sharing other people who just look like me. I think Ace and Grace came out of a place of need because when I grew up and wanted ACE representation, I didn't really see that. And I really wish that I saw more ACE people who looked like me and had journeys that aligned with mine. So Ace and Grace served that, and that's kind of what it is. Thank you for your question. Do I know? Do you know of any Black ACE organizations? Unfortunately, I don't. And that is mostly because of the fact that representation is very low within the Black ACE community. And I really wish I did know more Black ACE organizations. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't. I think that throughout the scope of asexuality, there are different people who are working towards building different types of representation within their own communities. In the earlier live stream that I was a part of, I was on the panel with a bunch of other ACEs from Africa who were talking about trying to find communities and trying to find support around asexuality. And I know they're all doing their own thing as well. And I think seeing that there's obviously a need for Black ACE representation is important for a lot of us. And a lot of us are working towards building that within our own respected communities. Are there any Black characters in media? Are there any Black characters in media that you like, headcanon or real, that I like? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you probably all have the chilling adventures of Sabrina, the Teenage Witch. What's his name? Shoot. The two Black characters that are in that show are my favorite. Like, their relationship is amazing. And I really like the fact that they showed how it started off difficult, how it started off rough, and how they became like romantic towards each other. I think that those two were my favorite aces in regards of like ace representation. I hope that answered your question, by the way. Let me pull this up. When I first saw the definition of asexual, it said little to no attraction, and now I see it means no attraction. I wanted to know if the first definition was for the whole spectrum or not. So asexuality means that you have no sexual attraction to other people. Because asexuality works as a spectrum, that can be different for different people. So within the spectrum of asexuality, there's asexual, there's aspec, there's gray sexual, there's demisexual. Within that, you can have little to no attraction towards another person, which means you're falling along the lines of gray sexual, or you can have no sexual attraction towards a person, which means you're falling closer to the line of asexual. I hope that answers your question. I don't think there needs to be a definite line there, because for asexuality and for most sexualities, it works as a spectrum. And it also allows people to feel more comfortable falling up and down that spectrum wherever they feel it aligns with them most. Cake or garlic bread? Oh man, I feel like this is like part of the stereotype with asexuality, but it's totally fine. I think for me, cake only if it's chocolate cake, and garlic bread only if I'm eating it with pasta. If you haven't covered this yet, do you have advice for how to broach the subject with others, family, friends, potential partners, without getting into too many details? So for me, for me, it's a little bit different because I typically share straight up that I'm asexual. And with my previous partners, they've kind of met me with a little frustrations or like lack of understanding or sometimes like sadness because they assume me to be not attracted to them at all. And again, like I mentioned, attraction could be different for other people. I can be attracted to you and not be sexually attracted to you. And what's gotten easier for me as I've gotten older has been saying that I am queer and this is where my alignment is. And that gives me the opportunity to be as vague as possible without risking the possibility of that person invalidating me because they don't understand what asexuality is, they don't understand how to validate a person who is asexual. So me saying that I'm queer leaves room for the other person to inquire more of what that queerness means to me and how I define it for myself. Because at the end of the day, asexuality is a part of the queer community. So saying that up front first lets them know, okay, this is how this person is. And I should do my best to learn more about this so I don't harm them with my words or invalidate them with my ignorance. I'm definitely a K case. Valid. um, this question said, who said it means no attraction? So I think the no attraction commentary came from when asexuality was first coming up into the limelight, with media and with Tumblr and social media commentary. That's something that a lot of people just gravitated to and stuck with at first. But as we started to understand what asexuality is, as we started to understand what queerness is, as we started to validate the fact that all these things work on a spectrum, we're moving away from that and starting to center more variations of what asexuality is. Even within asexualities, there's like micro labels that people use that further lengthens and deepens the spectrum of asexuality. So the no attraction thing is definitely not as big of a label that people use, but it's just a part of what asexuality is, not the whole thing. How do you feel about QPRs? So for those who don't know, QPRs are queer platonic relationships. And I go back and forth about using this term, mostly because for me, it's just a friendship. That's just how I see my friends. And if my friends aren't queer, then it's just a friendship. I think queer platonic relationships are something that some people use, mostly because if they have queer friends, it allows them to feel closer to that community and allows them to center the fact that it's not a romantic or sexual relationship. But for me, I just prefer to use the term friends, friends that I love, friends that I care about. And if you use the term queer platonic relationships, totally valid, totally support that. I think that the more specific that people are with the identities that they use and the labels that they use, it allows them to get better connected to different types of community. So it's up to the person. I think for me, that aligns sometimes, but I just prefer the term friendships. And that makes me feel a lot more centered and whole in the communities that I hold. Mm. Have you ever encountered other individuals in the queer community who resist the ace spectrum falling within the queer umbrella? Yes, I have. And it's so funny because the resistance that I get from people who say that queerness is not a part of the queer community, those same people come back and tell me that they think that they're ace. And I think that a part of it is just self hate and self hatred and choosing to, how do I say this in a way that makes folks understand? Choosing to over center the priority that sex has within queer community. And I say this because a lot of times when people hear queer community or queer spaces, they are often hypersexualized. And oftentimes, in so many queer spaces that I know, everyone that I know knows each other in some way, and it's usually because of a sexual encounter or a sexual hookup or XYZ. And a lot of times when I hear people who say, oh, queer or asexuality isn't a part of the queer spectrum, I'm hearing a lot of, you can't be queer if you don't have sexual attraction towards other people. When the whole term and livelihood and likeness of queerness is just being outside of heteronormativity. And that's quite literally what asexuality is. You are quite literally the opposite of heteronormative hypersexual society expression. And in itself, that is the heart of what queerness and asexuality is. So anytime that I hear resistance towards people supporting or including that being a part of the queer community, I'm just assuming that they're not ready to hear that you don't have to be a part of, you don't have to be sexually attracted or sexually involved with people that you're in community with to love and support them at all. Yeah, that's kind of the back and forth that I hear often. And because I'm a person who's just very confident in my asexuality and the space that I hold, it's not really something that bugs me too much. It's just something that I kind of sit with and see that it's a projection versus an actual invalidation of my identity. How do you celebrate Black Ace Joy? How do I celebrate Black Ace Joy? I think for me, I celebrate Black Ace Joy just by existing authentically as myself. I think Black Ace Joy is just me being me saying out loud, I'm asexual and sex positive, I'm asexual and aromantic, I'm asexual and androgynous, I'm asexual and a Black woman, I'm asexual and all these things. And that just makes me feel really good because for a long time, I really did question if I was even a part of this community because of a lot of the things that I have experienced in my life and the lack of representation that has come with it. And me being able to be myself has brought me a lot of joy and has brought me a lot more confidence in my voice. And knowing that there are other aces, especially Black aces, who see me and see me do things like this, see me on Ace and Grace, see me in other platforms speaking, see themselves reflected in a way, and gives them the opportunity to step into their truth, step into their voice, and step into, I guess, a more affirming path within their journey through asexuality brings me a lot of joy. It makes me smile. And oftentimes I forget about that being a part of this community because a lot of times I don't see myself represented, but knowing that there are people who I can say, you know, I'm really glad that you exist and really glad that you're here being who you are. Yeah, that brings me a lot of joy, a lot of serenity, or a lot of centering, a lot of grounding. Yeah. So are there any other questions? Because we are about to wrap up this live and I don't want anything to be unanswered if so. Do you identify under any of the aromantic labels? I think if I were to identify any of the labels, it might be like aromantic, panromantic. Quite honestly, I haven't explored the micro labels of aromanticism too much, but I think those would probably be the things that align with me most, just because, again, within the queer identity, there's so many different ways to express yourself. And just being ace, it allows me to see that in more depth. Thank you. Have you dated or would date an allosexual? Do you think those allo-ace relationships with no poly aspect can last or work? Since there's an elephant in the room, so yes, it's so funny because the majority of my relationships have been with allosexual people, and majority of them have been really hectic and really not great for me. But I will say that the one relationship that I had with a person who was allosexual was great because when I told them that I was asexual, at first they were not upset, but they got very emotional because they assumed that I was no longer in love with them, which is kind of difficult to say because at the time I aligned with demisexuality. So we like had a lot of sex, we did a lot of things, and that sexual desire just kind of ebbed off, and it was more like me being intimate with them in other ways. So when I shared that I was asexual, it was kind of a breath of fresh air to them because it gave them more perspective into who I was as a person and let them understand that, oh, it's not that she doesn't love me anymore. It's just that she's asexual and this is just not her vibe at the moment. And that strengthened our relationship a lot. With other people who are in ace and ally relationships with no poly aspect. I think it's a conversation needs to be had from the jump, because once you start to be more comfortable with the person that you're with and understand where they're coming from, understand who they are, you want to be able to validate them in ways that center them, center their experiences. Um, and I don't want to say it's an elephant in the room, because while it is something that should be discussed, I feel like exploring intimacy in other ways outside of sex should be discussed within all relationships, not just asexual and allo relationships. And it's unfortunate that it's stuck on allo and ace relationships because of the assumption that allosexual and asexual people don't have sex. I think that it's a conversation to be had from the beginning, so that your partner is aware of how you navigate this, and also allowing you both to see if you mesh well or not, and if the allosexual partner can actually meet the needs of the asexual partner, not the other way around. Because at the end of the day, the asexual person is the person who's the minority in the space. So understanding what their needs are and understanding how you can best support the ace person is going to be the best way to see if the relationship will actually move forward. And if you're an allosexual person who doesn't want to do that work and doesn't want to figure out how you as an allosexual person may have navigated relationships in the past in a more harmful way or more heteronormative way in this asexual relationship, I don't know. If that's not how you want to move forward, then that's not how you want to move forward. I don't think the asexual person should be subjected to any sort of harm because of it. Do you have any tips on how to embrace the different facets of one's ace identity as an adult, stepping into a more affirming path? I think for me, what I was able to do was create spaces that look like mine, find other people who look like me, and explore what asexuality meant for me in those spaces. Understand that asexuality is different for everybody. Understand that my sexuality doesn't take away from my experiences, from my humanity, my dating world, my romantic relationships at all. And finding other people who are ace also helps a lot. For me, again, it was difficult finding Black aces who look like me, and just finding education that supported my own journey allowed me to feel more comfortable in my growth. And oddly enough, dating also helped me feel more comfortable in my adulthood as an asexual person. Not because dating is like great generally, but like it allowed me to be more firm in my own boundaries. It allowed me to be more comfortable saying what my needs are. It allowed me to be more comfortable saying this is who I am and I'm not changing. And it also provided me more of an opportunity to do that with my friends and my platonic or like queer platonic relationships as well. Just doing that gave me more of an opportunity to just step into that more affirming path, and being a person who's like paving a way for other Black aces and POC aces to like see themselves. It's giving me more of an opportunity to not only step into that, but find more ways to educate myself and allow others to feel seen in that way as well. What is your Instagram handle? So it's already added in the chat. My IG is _AceInGrace _. You can find me on there. I just made like a few posts today, and you can find me posting more about asexuality there. You can find me like linking with more creators who are asexual. You can probably find me sharing more about the asexual and Black experience and the asexual experience from other people of color. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Interesting. That's pretty much it for me. But I really appreciate the fact that this exists. I appreciate the fact that all of you came through and asked questions and supported and shared some love. Like the banner below says, there's a Spanish-speaking ACE live stream happening in a few moments, and that stream is going to be fully in Spanish. So if you speak Spanish, if you understand it, if you want to have more ways to tap into communities like that, go for that and hop into that. There's also going to be the Aces in for Sleep live stream that's going to be occurring throughout the day. I'll probably be hopping into that towards the evening, but hop into all of these lives, show some love, support, contribute, do what you did here and there, and have a great day. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of International Asexuality Day. Bye.